Today, we welcome one of the UK's most highly respected sports lawyers, Daniel Geey.
Welcome, Daniel.
Daniel, welcome. Just so our audience understand just exactly how lucky we are to be speaking to you today, Daniel's clients include Premier League clubs, Champions League football clubs, and top agencies. He's the author of multiple books on football contracts and sports law, as well as being a partner at the sports group Sheridans.
Anything we've missed there, Daniel?
No, it's always lovely to say, but I am always a bit, it's great. It's really nice that you guys think such nice things of me. But the truth is, it's all just it sounds a bit harsh getting into it so early in the discussion, but it's all just the illusion of reputation, isn't it? Really, it's okay. Like it's, but the way I see it is like I'm just trying to help people do stuff in the profession, and I've been lucky enough, just like you guys now, to have worked in it for 15 years or so, and just seen quite a lot during my time. And one of the things that I love doing is speaking to you guys and others around just trying to educate people in the space, people that maybe don't understand the industry as much, haven't been involved in it as long, in order to make sure people can get the best advice, can understand the industry in more detail, and whatever anyone's role is, to be able to then work through how best that the industry can work for them.
I think that in this industry, in this sector, there are a few like sharks probably about. So we wanted to really make sure that people understood that the advice that we're getting from you today, is from a very, very reputable source. I mean, literally every time we go on Sky Sports and there's a sort of conversation about law, you seem to be on it. But you're on Sky Sports quite regularly, aren't you?
Yeah, just whenever I can do it and wherever they call up. But yeah, it's just on particular topics that hopefully I know enough about. The idea, like anything, is just to be able to break down complicated issues into stuff that people can understand. And that's in a way the stuff I've done with my book. That's the stuff I do with the advice on a daily basis. And that's the stuff I like talking about on shows like this.
So just to clarify, you're not a football agent, Daniel?
No, and to be fair, that's a really important bit just to emphasize, is that I work alongside as a complementary service to agents, in truth. So, just like if you can imagine the player in the middle of the focal point of things, around the player, there'll be usually an agent, a lawyer, an accountant, a financial manager, social and commercial team as well. And I'm just one of those, hopefully experts that can help elite players sort of on their path. But I don't do agency work, but ultimately because I don't want to be an agent, but also because then I think agents would then see me as competition. And I do a lot of work with some great agents and agencies, and I want to be that reputable complementary service to them and their clients.
So to clarify that, so you're the sports lawyer, and then you work with agencies who will kind of like manage more of like the commercial side, and they will bring you in at the point where there's a deal to be made or contracts to be signed.
Exactly both. So if you can imagine, the way I usually try and do is split up between on-field contracts and off-field contracts. So the on-field contracts are always the employment contracts that players are entering into with clubs. And so I will help agents and players negotiate the legal provisions and drafting of those contracts and make sure everyone understands what they're signing up to. And on the off-field side of things, exactly as you said, Sean, what I'm generally doing is working with players on their commercial brand ambassadorial boot deals to justify, or not justify, but to be able to then work with particular brands that can then exploit the player's image, that can promote and endorse particular players at certain times, depending on the product and the sector and the circumstance.
And is that very common now for top players?
Yeah, I mean, as we could probably talk about in a bit of detail, a lot of the top players will have image rights companies, and the image rights companies are effectively to deal with off-field commercial opportunities, and the bigger elite agencies and elite players will tend to have agents that will do their on-field employment negotiation along with a lawyer as well, and they will also have off-field commercial representation teams that will be engaging with Adi, Nike, Puma, New Balance, whatever else it might be, and then also the various consumer brands that the players would like to engage with, in order to be able to see a win-win, which is players receive decent amounts of money to be able to endorse particular products. The win-win is when a player is already using that product and can be pretty authentic in advertising the facts that they're using it, they're wearing it, they're playing with it, whatever else it might be, and that's usually the holy trinity.
How old are they normally when they start with you, or
well,
with an agent?
Yeah, I mean, players in the UK, at least anywhere, under the Football Association rules, can only sign with an agent within the 16th year of their birthday, basically. So the year of their 16th birthday. So I can represent players at any age, in truth, whereas agents need to be a lot more careful under the intermediary regulations. But I will advise players sometimes on young players and their parents on entering into representation contracts and making sure they're fit for purpose with agents. It can sometimes be a little bit older. So usually when the money becomes a little bit more significant, and the first year pro. So, when scholars are signing first year pro deals at 17, that tends to be for the on-field stuff that I will tend to get more involved and try and explain and understand, and give parents especially the understanding of what them and their children are basically signing up to.
Are there agents out there who will go and sort of pursue players that are, very young? Like, there's a top sort of 12-year-old or 13-year-old. We've sort of heard rumors that happens. Are you aware of that happening at all?
I'm not, to be honest, but my advice to any agent that's wanting to do that is you need to be extremely careful. Firstly, because it's under the FA rules, it's not appropriate. But there's always a distinction between the FA intermediaries rules are to do with on-field negotiations, so to do with professional contracts, basically, and scholar contracts to a degree, and agents helping with that process. What the FA intermediate rules don't cover is commercial deals. So it is possible, I guess, for a very young up-and-coming talent that's 12, 13, 14 years old, before they would have an on-field agent, to have an off-field agent that manages to find them a Nike boot deal or manages to find them an ambassadorial deal for something. So that is possible. And that's why maybe you'll sometimes hear rumors of, agents speaking with very, younger kids in their families. But ultimately, that can only be for non-playing related matters. But again, the FA are pretty strong on this, which is, agents can only now, based on the new rules, only approach basically for minors, players' parents first, or players' guardians, more or less, to make sure, everyone's aware of the circumstances for the meeting, that can understand the significance of why they might be entering into a rep contract and all of that type of thing.
Yep, I completely understand. Myself and Sean are hearing more and more of these deals, happening where 13, 14-year-olds who are regarded top players are having these commercial deals with Adidas and Nike. So just for parents to be clear, at that age, that is allowed, right?
Yeah, my understanding is that the agents' rules don't apply to commercial deals. Now, the issue is, however, is that what the FA will always be concerned about is that relationship then for commercial deals turns into representing on-pitch related matters, and that's where the agents aren't able to do that. The agents can only sign up, as I said, minors in the 16th birthday, more or less, and before that, they can't represent them for club negotiations. Because
I'm guessing that's a way in for these agents, by presenting these deals through Adidas and Nike. They establish a relationship with the player and the parent, and then when they do become of age, then they can make a formal approach to sign the player to the agency, I guess.
Exactly, yeah, exactly right. But there's at the moment, it's like in any other sport, there aren't regulations prohibiting a 13-year-old skier or the 12-year-old cricketer or whatever else it might be from having relationships with commercial brands or otherwise, so long as their parent and guardian are fully aware of what's going on. So I think sometimes it's important to see football not necessarily just in isolation, but in wider context. And Sean, one of the things you said was, you see some agents as sharks or whatever else it might be. The truth is in any industry, without extremely robust regulation, and even with extremely robust regulation in place, there are always going to be people that are going to want to try and take shortcuts and find different opportunities and avenues. It's certainly not necessarily just in football, never mind sports, and never mind in a range of other sectors. So, granted, there might well be particular practices that people don't like or see, but it's obviously a societal point rather than just a football point.
That's so true. Sometimes, because football is kind of the sport for England, it maybe sometimes gets a bit of a hard time, because there are, you go to the West End and there's tons of like child actors in the West End, and they obviously have people representing them and commercial agreements that manage their careers, even though they're so young. So what can parents do to kind of like look out for, bad, I suppose, the sort of the dodgy agents, if that's the term?
Well, I think there's lots of things. I think that the first point always is that when parents are looking out for the best agent to represent their son or daughter, they're coming, unfortunately, from a position of imperfect visibility on the market. And what I mean by that is that their interaction with agents over a particular period of time will simply be whoever has managed to approach them or start speaking to them about the possibility of representing their kid, rather than possibly, for example, having an accountant or a lawyer or a financial advisor saying, these are the agencies that I tend to work with. I know these guys are very good for this particular purpose or otherwise. So what we'd recommend, sometimes what I do, for example, is I will recommend 4 or 5 of my agency clients to go and to speak with them at the right time, so that they have in-depth conversations with a lot of different agents and agencies to see the best fit. And a lot of the time, sometimes the person I think will work out well with one person doesn't, and sometimes the person I think won't work out well ends up clicking and it being the right way to do it. But I think what's important is sometimes not to take the first agent that you find approach, and because they're offering the world, signing up a 2-year contract, a 2-year rep contract, and then realizing a few months in or a year in that actually it's not all that it's made out to be. I think a lot of the time, parents, guardians having that ability to be able to, in a positive way, see the market, understand all the different agents and agencies that are out there, and then come to a more informed decision, I think is actually a very important thing.
I love that. And is there like a website out there that, with like the recommendations that you've made of like, agencies, is there a list anywhere? Have you got a blog or something that's got them documented?
Maybe that's what I need to do, is the truth. But guys, to help out. I mean, generally there's probably now, 4 or 5 of the biggest UK agencies, and then outside of that, then there are agents that do things by themselves or within a group of a smaller number, for example. So, if you look at the FA website, every year they publish a transaction list, basically, of which agent and which agency has done the various deals. They don't give the amount breakdown, but they show who does the deals, basically. And usually it's 4 or 5 agencies that do the vast majority of the deals in the UK. So I always think that's the best place to start, which is, base CAA, Stella, companies like USM, companies like 366. I'm probably missing out a couple of my clients as well. But, and Wasserman as well is probably the main ones. So if you start with the basis of those 4 or 5 that do a large majority of the deals in the UK, the issue then is that who is the best person within those type of bigger agencies to be able to be the best fit for the individual and the player that then works.
Yeah, because that's where the player might not be a top talent. So then they're maybe at one of the lower academies and trying to forge a career. And those top agencies might not want to work with them. But then the parent thinks that for me to get that contract and move up in the career, they need to have an agent. And so then they go and get someone else, and maybe that's a less experienced person. One example, as you were talking, that I've got in my mind is one of the best players that we've had in our company, and we've had people go and be pros in Premier League. But this kid was so talented, had a difficult journey, ended up getting an agent who I don't think had any other clients around the age of like 14. And now the player is a pro at a Premier League club, but they're sort of not quite getting into the first team, and they're out on sort of loan. The mum feels that the agent is a good like mentor, and but like maybe has not got the connections needed to help get that player onto that next level. But the player is so invested and doesn't want to leave the agent now because they forged such a close bond. So, I mean, have you heard of any experiences like that before?
Look, I think there's lots of things to unpack there, but okay. The 2 or 3 things there which are really important is a player has a finite earning capacity, and everybody only sees, as you guys know much better than I, everyone only sees the multi-million-pound elite players playing at the top clubs, earning huge amounts of money and thinking that it's easy. Where for the vast majority, the 99% of players throughout the world and in the UK, there's a limited, period of time for them to earn the maximum amount of money, really, in order to be able to have even a 10-year earning window of significant sums. That's got to last professional players for the remaining part of their lives, or at least to be able to earn enough to be able to then transition into another career post playing professional playing career. And so all I would say there is, without being too cynical and critical, which is you've got to find the best agent that suits the purpose for what the player really needs. And a lot of the time, players and parents have idealistic views about what an agent can do. Firstly, because perhaps the player is not good enough, is the truth, to make it at the top level. But obviously the parents and the player are invested to a huge degree in that's their life's work, and that's the only way that a player and their family are going to get out of difficult, economic or financial or other issues, and all of their hopes are pinned on a particular circumstance happening. And the inverse is also true, where an agent actually isn't up to scratch, hasn't got the network or the connections, and has blagged it quite well, but the player is then tied in to the agent for not being able to do a very good job over a significant period of time. So the answer to all of that is to your question, I think, is you don't need your agent to be your best friend or mentor in order for them to do the best transactional job for you. And you can still have mentors and people and developmental people around you that can do a great job in lots of different ways. But sometimes, and this is the most difficult thing really that we get back to, the right person needs to have the right network to be able to pick the phone up to any academy head or any director of football or scout or whatever the role might be, scout, whatever else it might be, to be able to then chat to the chief exec or the chairman of a particular club and say, this is the boy or girl that you need for your reserve team, for your first team squad. and that actually that person, that intermediary, has got a track record of doing those type of deals. And the problem is that families as well, when they first have agents approach them or whatever else it might be at the right times, they won't necessarily know the right questions to ask, unfortunately, for the usual reason that they're not experienced at dealing with the football industry. They're not experienced at dealing with agents. They're not experienced at dealing with how to get the best deal. And so as a result of that, there's a perfect storm of finding agents, unfortunately, that might not be fit for purpose, and others that are very, very good, that get the deals done, but can't get in front of the families to be able to demonstrate that they're good enough to get the deals done.
Daniel, what are your thoughts on parents who perhaps want to navigate their child's journey and become their agent?
It's probably one of the most emotive questions that I get asked, actually. And there's a few ways of dealing with it, the truth. I think for any parent that thinks that they have the ability to and skill set to be able to negotiate a contract with an elite club at first instance and do a brilliant job, I think they're mistaken, is my honest view. But it's a lot more nuanced than that, in truth. And I'll try and just give you a few examples. If, for example, the contract to be negotiated is, let's start again, I'll just do it in reverse. Usually an agent's job is to do one of two things. One is to negotiate an employment contract with the current club, or the other is to try and negotiate a transfer and an employment contract with another club. The second part is very, very difficult to do, as we talked about previously, if you do not have a very, very strong network already in football, that you can pick up the phone to the people that matter at the various clubs, unless your child is in huge demand, which means every club in the country want them, which is, again, an outlier and will very, very, very rarely happen. So if, for example, you as a parent think that, and the player might be, signed their first pro deal and might be a year out, and the club wants to renegotiate that deal, fine, you might think the player's worth this amount of money. You might not have anything to benchmark them against, so you might not know whether that's true or not. But the way that you usually are able to benchmark whether the value of that player is by understanding the market. And usually you understand the market by doing lots of other deals at the same time, speaking with lots of other clubs, speaking with their chief executives, heads of football, scouting departments, etc., to understand value in the markets and everything else that comes with it. It's extremely unlikely that parent is going to have any of those relationships whatsoever, is going to understand at all what to do when they're having those conversations, and be doing lots of deals with other clubs for other players at the same time. So the reason why I say that is that if a player who is represented by their parents is likely to be moving to another club, unless they're an elite player, they are at a significant disadvantage because they've got no idea how to structure that negotiation or that transfer. Usually, sometimes the more difficult feature is trying to broker the clubs agreeing the transfer fee rather than the actual wages for the new club, regardless of anything else. The other nuance of that is it is simpler if the player is going to stay with that club and is going to renegotiate, for then the player's family to be able to potentially do that deal, because they're not dealing with multiple entities and negotiations. They're just dealing with the binary, 1 versus 1 at this particular club. But the problem still may maintain is that they've either got an inflated sense of that player's value or actually no sense at all about that player's value, and then may underplay the position that the player might necessarily be in. Because don't forget, if you're working with bigger agencies as well, that agency is likely to speak with lots of other agents about, what would a 21-year-old English player that's close to the first team be earning at this particular club. And then that market intel becomes really, really important. So if I haven't hopefully overcomplicated the situation, the question is actually one of the most difficult questions to answer, because you're talking emotively about your son or daughter's future, as we said. And also because it can possibly set the family up for life. It can set up everybody, if it's done right, for everyone to be able to take a piece of the pie, and for everyone to benefit and be successful, as the player potentially is successful. The way that I've seen things develop over the last 4 or 5 years is that what actually happens in practice is that the player's family, mother, father, brother, sister, partners up with an established agent, and they split commissions in different ways. Because ultimately what ends up happening is the agent will still want to be involved and do the deal, and that the player's family can lean on the agent for their market intel, for their experience, for their visibility, for the transparency on the market, for understanding how this club works, for understanding how another club works, to understand the nuances of things that happen, if they happen quickly, slowly, if that's negotiation tactics, if that's different ways of dealing with things. So, usually my view is that agents serve very good purposes, and if you can find the right ones, then, as we talked about, can definitely win. But to go on their own, there are significant risks. And again, as we talked about, you don't know what you don't know. So whenever I then speak to families generally about saying, well, what did you do when you were thinking about negotiating this particular clause on that contract? They'll say, well, actually, I didn't know about it, so we didn't negotiate it, or whatever else it might be. And, the only reason we say that is that's not to say you did a bad job. It's just to say it takes decades for agents to become very good agents at all the negotiation parts. If you expect a family member suddenly, because they know the player the best, to get the best deal for them, usually it's a very high risk strategy.
Amazing insight, Daniel. You touched on the fact that players have such a significant window to maximize their earning potential. Do you think that this is why some clubs have such strong opinions on agents, as agents could potentially go in and with the 17-year-olds and get them a move away from the club to start maximizing their earning potential?
I think it's actually really, you bring up a great point, and it's a very traditional narrative, which is clubs don't like agents.
Yeah,
it's just not correct, unfortunately, because it's a pretty easy narrative for everybody to spin. Now, there might be particular agents that clubs don't like because they've been burned on deals, or they've pushed too hard in different ways or otherwise. And that's the agent's issue, actually, is that the agent needs to be able to manage club relationships almost as well as player relationships, in truth. Because if a club won't pick up the phone to the agent anymore because of something that's happened previously, then that doesn't suit either the club or the player or the agent's relationship generally. But my view on the whole is that clubs actually really want to deal with agents that they know get deals done. That are going to be sensible, that they know are going to push them in particular ways, but understand firstly how the club works, understand what the player's general value might be, and understand that they're not going to generally push when the situation dictates otherwise. So it's like in anything, I would always rather deal on the other side of a dispute, on a commercial deal or anything else, a experienced sports lawyer that I've negotiated with on lots of occasions, because I know that we know how not the game works, but we know the particular pressure points and negotiation areas that are most important to my clients. It's the same thing when it comes to transfer, renegotiations of contracts, or other particular matters that happen at clubs. Clubs will always prefer to deal with the agents that they know will get things done because they've been there, seen it, done it before, and appreciate sometimes the value that they bring. That's not to say that the clubs will publicly go and say, oh, thanks so much to this agent for getting this deal across the line. They'll never say that. But the public perception is always going to be, agents making 3 calls, earning a few million of commission, and riding off into the sunset. And honestly, all I can say is from my experience, and to be fair, I'm probably slightly, rose tinted because I work with a lot of very good agents.
Yeah.
Good stuff that the agents, do on a regular basis. And I see that the value that they bring to the players, and I see the value that they also bring to clubs. So I think that the narrative, the general narrative, because it's a relatively easy narrative to be able to run, which is, clubs hate dealing with agents. Sometimes that can be the case, but usually it can be the case when it's agents that maybe are slightly less experienced, or it can be in particular instances where, agents are ultimately saying to the player, we're not re-signing with this club because their offer isn't good enough. And that's obviously going to annoy the club, really, and then puts the club in difficult positions of, do we transfer the player out? Do we offer more money? And all of those other things. So in a way, the agent is there to best protect the interests of the player. And the truth is that a lot of the time also, the best interests of the player very much conflict with the interests of the club.
I'm going to be very, very careful in how I word this, but one of my close friends is a coach, a very senior coach at a club, and he basically told me that the board had someone who was connected to an agent, and they were pushing players through that club who were connected to that agency, and that sounds like that's the common practice. But also on the other side of it, have you heard any examples of what I've referred to there?
Well, the truth is it shouldn't happen. There's two different things there. Is like when you say preferred agents, I think sometimes there are a group of agents and agencies that are big enough that there is the ability that they know that they can get stuff done with players that they have on their books, or their ability to be able to broker deals. There might be a preferred agency that a particular club has to say, use these guys, because we know that either they can find the right player for us or they have the right player for us. So the truth it does happen quite a lot where, you've got clubs that rely on particular agents and agencies because they know that if they say to the agent, we need an attacking midfielder in the age of 20 to 23 that doesn't need a work permit, that will have great resale value, that we've only got 8 million worth of transfer fee to be able to spend on them, and we need it in the next 2 weeks or so, and you need to identify it, then a lot of the time, if that agent or agency has got a proven track record of finding those types of deals for that club and then following through and actually delivering, to be fair, I can see the logic of saying, or of a board member or a particular member of the team saying, in truth, if we know that these guys can deliver, well, let's see what they can do.
That's becoming more common, isn't it? With the example of Mendes and the involvement he has with Wolves, with these Portuguese connections. We know they have a lot of Portuguese players. Is that right?
If you actually look at the transaction list on the FA website in relation to Wolves, Mendes doesn't appear very much on quite a lot of stuff, apparently. So I agree that the perception is, Wolves owners also have a stake in Mendes's company. Therefore, the logic would dictate that Mendes would be involved in a lot of those deals. I'd have to have a look at the latest ones, but obviously he is involved in some, but I'm not sure as many as you think, perhaps.
Okay. Interesting.
I think because I get what you mean there about preferred agencies. I suppose I didn't necessarily articulate it as well as I could have. What I was more saying was that this board member is almost financially connected to the agency. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, look, without casting aspersions on anything, directors and employees, especially directors, will have fiduciary duties, which is to act in the best interest of the club. Now, if they are, for example, making secret profit because they are saying you should use this agency because I might benefit from that financially, then that's a significant problem that the club would probably have to deal with.
And then another thing, when parents should start to go and get support from an agent, do you think that should be maybe around the ages of sort of 14 or 15, in your opinion?
Well, so there's a few things there. The technical perspective is under the FA intermediaries regs is that players can only sign rep contracts or enter into have negotiations with agents in the year of their 16th birthday.
Right.
So you need to be really careful as an agent and a family of, really speaking to anyone before that time for on-field, representation. Now, again, it simply depends on which club you're at and what their procedure and process is for particular things. So, as you guys know more than I, when a player is signing a scholar agreement, that is a 2-year agreement which can be extended for a 3rd year. So you potentially can be a scholar at 18 or 19 years old, possibly. Now, the other approach that a lot of the elite clubs will take is that you enter into a scholar agreement at 16, but you will sign a pro deal, an agreed pro deal at 17, which will then give a lot of financial information, well, not financial information, but will provide salary for then usually a 3-year period from 17 to 20. So it might well be at that time, that when you're entering a scholarship agreement at 16, which is effectively putting in place a pro deal at 17, you'd probably want some advice from the right agent at that time. Now, if you are a League One or League Two player entering into a scholar deal at 16 on relatively basic terms, it might be that you don't necessarily need an agent for that purpose. But as soon as then you start playing well and get close to the first team, even at League One and League Two level, then you could possibly be able to need an agent if the club starts getting, inquiries about what's, the player's contractual status, what they can do, what type of transfer fee there would be. And then they start eking out, interest from other clubs. And then, the agent starts doing their job, which is working out what the transfer value of the player might be and what the commercial value of the player might be, the employment value of the player might be, to be able to then move to another club. So, all of that. I would always be really cautious on, obviously, players and agents speaking too soon on particular things, just because there are likely breaches of the intermediary regulations. But there is a chain of thought. I've seen some stuff, some blogs online, especially from some other lawyers as well, which is actually we need to get rid of this artificial minors minors prohibition that agents can't speak to 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old players or their families per se. Is that sometimes maybe do we need to allow agents to be able to speak to players and their families at a much younger age, so that then they can get the right advice even younger, but then also be able to put a structure in place that best suits the player. At what time and at what framework does 14 years old work? Is it 12 years old? Is it 10 years old? And then you get started into real difficult value judgments about when, that could be a possibility.
At 17, when the player is perhaps going for their first pro contract, what does your normal, typical contract entail?
Well, it depends. Like, Sean was talking about at Chelsea, those Chelsea Chelsea first pro deals can still be quite significant in terms of salary, and also significant in terms of drafting. In truth, there can be option years, there can be release clauses, there can be the abilities to go out on loan, all of the usual stuff. But it's like anything. A first-year pro at a League One or League Two club is not going to be significant money, and it's probably going to be a page and a half. Whereas, an elite Premier League club first pro contract can still be 8, 10, 12 pages long. And then it's important, obviously, that you hopefully then get sign-off from an accountant as well, but obviously a lawyer, just at least so they can explain to the player and the family about what they are signing up to, and understanding, how things work. It can be as simple as, how many times do you need to appear in the first team squad in order to get, an uplift in your salary? How many times do you need to appear on the bench or play in the team to be able to, activate a new renegotiation between the club, for example? How much is the agent going to get paid for the work that they're going to do, and when do they get paid? How does that affect the player's tax status as a result of what their annual return would have to be? So there's always loads of things which, I think players and families of the players, the truth is you don't know what you don't know. And unless you're educated to some degree, which most aren't, in how the industry works and how things are structured, it's usually a very reactionary process by the players and their families as to be like, oh, actually, I didn't know that was the case. And I didn't know the club was paying the agent. And I didn't know I had a tax liability for that payment. And I didn't know that the salary would only go up by this amount in the third year. And I wasn't aware that this would be the case, etc. So, a lot of the time, the agent's job and the agent's and the lawyer or the accountant's job is to, as I said in the beginning, try and provide common sense advice, but also to be able to explain what can sometimes be pretty complicated matters in clear, plain English, really.
Are you seeing a shift in finances of the women's game, Daniel?
Well, it's a great one. What I would say there is just with the various commercial deals that are happening, if it's on the broadcasting side with Sky and DAZN and YouTube, if it's with the deals like the Barclays are entering into with the women's game as well, that Visa are obviously doing as well. I think it's I'm still at that intermediate place where I do work with quite a lot of elite female athletes and players and help them with their renegotiations. And at that elite level, it's significant sums that they are being paid. But I'm always conflicted because, the truth is that, the men's game has had such an incredible head start. And that's no fault of the women's game at all, in truth. In fact, it's the opposite. So I'm always cautious of framing the women's game discussion in terms of the catch-up that needs to happen on the female side of the game, and how the splits should happen should, women's football generally and the WSL be entitled to more money. Should they get more coverage? How do they go about commercializing greater and all the rest of that type of stuff? Because, I think ultimately everyone can say, well, it's just football. But the truth is that the commercial dynamics still are so varied and disparate to make it, usually talking about two different elements. But what I would say is that the number of people that I work with in the women's game that cut across women's football and male football generally, there's some brilliant people with some really exciting ideas about how to do things a bit differently, in truth. And that's what I really, really like. And I think one of the things that WSL are doing really well to a degree, along with Sky, for example, along with Barclays and others, is I think the thing that will help the WSL and the Champions League coverage and World Cup related stuff to a degree is there is less female football behind the paywall than the male football. And I think that's really important, in truth. And without turning it back to the male game, the truth is that a lot of the male game is behind different, subscription paywalls, which makes it difficult for generally lots of people to be able to watch elite football at different times. Whereas I think the great thing that women's football is trying to do is reach scale and coverage and create new audiences and new demand. And I'm all in favor of that approach. And hopefully it's not an approach which is, well, we're just going to maximize coverage and then to put it behind the paywall where we've got enough demand. I think it needs to be this approach that to a degree everyone needs to commercialize, but that coverage becomes really important to garner the next generations of fans, so that in however many generations it might be, that there isn't this artificial distinction between, I'm watching Chelsea ladies or Chelsea men, for example. It's almost like I'm a supporter of Chelsea and I go and watch both teams play at different times. So I think those sort of artificial barriers, which I can understand to a degree, are there at the moment, because you still have to say Chelsea women's are playing or whatever else it might be, where you don't need to say Chelsea men's, you just say Chelsea. All of those types of things, I think, are generational things that in time will fade, in truth. And it just becomes a normal thing to talk about who are the main superstars of football globally, and no one distinction between a male footballer or a female footballer.
Exactly. And I think it takes people at ground level and working behind the scenes in football to call out bad practice as well, because like I was helping a player. Like I've never been involved in like agency stuff before, but there's a female player that needed some help with an introduction to organizing like some sponsorship, and through some conversations and speaking to some of the big sports companies, a comment that came back to me was, we can't pay that much. We don't even pay the boys that much. And I called it out. I said that's don't tell me that the boys can't be paid that much. I don't mind if you say the senior women are not paid as much as that, but to use that comparison is really poor. And I think that's something that needs to change. Like, with all of us in football, to then create that more equality. I really like throughout the conversation that we've been having, Daniel, you're one of the first people that's come on the podcast. In all your examples, you've always said your son or daughter, and you might not even realize you're doing it, but we notice when we're doing the podcast. I think it's really important.
Well, the truth is also, I've got two daughters that are totally football. Unfortunately, they're Spurs fans rather than Liverpool fans, but that's a different story. But that's the truth, as I see it firsthand, and it's mainly from my wife as well, who's involved in grassroots female football in loads of different ways. And there's a real, there's a real sea change happening, because whereas before, girls were using men as their idols to a degree. Now girls are seeing themselves through the lens of their own female players that look like them. Blonde, white, black, whatever ethnicity, race, color, hair color, body type, short, tall, whatever else it might be. And my view is that they can relate to those elite athletes a lot more, in truth. So that then, I take my eldest Izzy to the Women's FA Cup final every year. It doesn't matter who plays in it to a degree, but what I want her to understand is that that it's really important to see both sides of the industry to a degree at the moment. But more importantly, to be like, I want her to almost say, I want to be the next Sam Kerr, or I want to be the next Fran Kirby, or I want to be the next Jill Scott, or I want to be the next Steph Houghton, or whoever else it might be. Because they're the ones doing and laying the groundwork. Because I see, like, the youngsters coming through, the young girls coming through different academies now, and technically they're on a different level. I mean, it's unreal compared to where maybe the game was at 20, 30 years ago, where the same type of investment and the same type of infrastructure and everything else wasn't perhaps there. So, what I'm really excited about is the WSL Champions League stuff. Well, I don't even want to call it Women's World Cup, like the World Cup featuring, not featuring the men. And able to see all of this level increase. Like, I was watching, I think it was Barcelona, Chelsea, Barcelona, Chelsea in the Champions League final, I think the year before last. And that Barcelona team were just different gravy. It was unbelievable, that technical level they were performing at. And as much as I'm like, well, I want to watch, Barcelona at the Nou Camp play, whoever it is, and all the rest of it. The great thing now, even for my generation and generations that are going to follow, is I don't think there's going to be that distinction between the men's and the women's team, or there shouldn't be. And that will only just become really, I think, pretty commonplace.
Daniel, just to finish off, because I know we're running out of time, what has been your most proudest moment of your career, other than being on the Project Footballer podcast, of course?
The thing with my, and maybe it's more my personality is the truth, is that, whenever I'm doing a deal or, a transfer or a takeover or a commercial deal or the rest of it, a lot of the time, I'm just more relieved to have done the deal without it falling apart at the seams, is the truth. So a lot of the time, my feeling after something has happened isn't necessarily pride, unfortunately. It's relief that it's happened and it's done and everything else that comes with it. But, the proudest stuff that I end up working with is actually going along to games, watching players that I know quite well play, have a great game. And in truth, and maybe it's a little bit of an ego thing, of then seeing them afterwards and then them saying hello to me and going, Dan, how are you doing? How things going on? And then seeing the players actually, and them seeing me as just, we're just normal human beings who are maybe, and the players are much more in the limelight, but ultimately they are humans that have the same types of worries and insecurities. But everybody wants a piece of them because they're part of a team that they very much identify with. And so I'm going slightly off tangent here, but I remember it was after the Champions League final that Liverpool lost to Real Madrid, where Karius made those two unfortunate mistakes in the final. And I just remember thinking afterwards, I was thinking, of all the players that I don't work with Karius, but all the players that I've worked with over the time, is that you watch a game and they make a mistake or something happens and all the rest of it, and everyone gets on their back and hopefully then they do something good and all the rest of it. And I just remember tweeting after that game, just saying something like, and I was obviously a disappointed Liverpool fan, obviously getting to the final of the Champions League and losing. But I remember just tweeting something like, to everyone, not that I've got a massive following, but just saying something like, imagine having the worst day of your life and work life in front of 500 million people, as Karius obviously did, taking that in and maybe just taking a breath before realizing that he's having a pretty hard time of it now as well. And obviously I got a lot of abuse and all the rest of that type of stuff. But what I mean is that I think the thing that's really important generally is to understand that there's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes with players, especially. And a lot of them do an incredible amount of good in their communities, charity, giving of their time, which they don't want to publicize, that they don't publicize as well, but that they're just normal people overall, just trying to get on with their lives and do good things, basically. So if I wasn't to say I was proud of anything, I'm proud of a lot of the players that I work with that do really great stuff for their communities, that goes under the radar, that sometimes I will try and just help publicize, not because the player wants me to publicize it, but because I think it's actually a really important thing to show that they're just like normal people wanting to make a little bit of a difference.
Amazing.
No, Daniel, thank you so much. I mean, some of our players, some of the parents who listen to this, we know they have children who are at top academies. That there will be people who come across this podcast who will have players who probably could need your services. You described earlier that the way that they might get in touch with you, would it be through the Wassermans or through those agencies? And then if they were represented by those agencies, they would then use your services, or would anyone come to you directly?
Yeah, anyone can come to me directly, is the truth.
Okay.
Best, I'm more than happy for you to give out or otherwise, because lots of the time, sometimes the best way is when players and their families get referred to me for various different things, and they're saying we don't know which agency to choose, and so then it might be that I can help at least then make some suggestions of speak to this person here, speak to this person here, speak to this person here, and then come to your own decisions based on your experiences. So there's loads of ways of doing it, and I'd be more than happy to help any way I can.
Brilliant. All right. Well, thank you so much,
Daniel.
Really appreciate it.
No problem. Great to chat.
Cheers.
Brilliant.
Bye.
Cheers.